Emma, 16, vanished on her way home from school. Just 2 days later, 15-year-old Sophie disappeared from a quiet Liverpool street. Within a week, 3 more girls were gone. No warnings, no signs, and no one knew why. Behind the city's bustling streets, a ruthless gang was watching, planning, and waiting. This is the story of Liverpool's darkest secret and network of fear, control, and abduction that shook the city to its core. It started with a single report that seemed almost ordinary. A teenage girl didn't return home after school. At first, neighbors thought she had stayed late with friends or missed her usual bus. But then, another girl vanished the very next day, walking along a different street, at a different time, with no one noticing anything unusual. Within a week, 3 more girls were reported missing, all teenagers, all from different parts of Liverpool. The similarities were subtle, yet chilling. They were all alone when last seen, none had been involved in fights or had run-ins with anyone known to authorities, and each disappearance happened in the early evening when streets were still moderately busy. The city, normally lively and bustling even at night, began to feel smaller, stranger. Parents stopped sending their children out for errands, insisting that even short trips be accompanied by someone else. Shops noticed fewer young customers wandering through after school, and public transport reported unusually quiet buses in the evenings. Social media began filling with worried posts, parents asking if anyone had seen their daughters. Rumors of abductions, and the growing sense that Liverpool's streets were no longer safe. Schools issued notices urging students to travel in groups, and neighborhood watch groups organized patrols. Yet despite all the precautions, the disappearances continued. Police were initially perplexed. There were no signs of struggle, no eyewitnesses, no apparent motive, and no immediate connections between the girls. Families were desperate, pleading for information, holding vigils, and spreading photos in hopes someone would remember seeing their child. The public's anxiety was palpable, spreading faster than any official statement from authorities could soothe. What made the situation even more unnerving was the randomness of the locations. Girls disappeared from busy shopping streets, quiet residential lanes, and even near school gates. No one felt safe walking home, and conversations everywhere carried a whisper of fear. Community centers and local parks became eerily empty in the evenings. Liverpool, a city known for its resilience and close-knit communities, was suddenly gripped by an invisible threat. By the end of the week, the police began to suspect that these were not isolated incidents. And how could they operate so boldly in plain sight without leaving any trace? The city that prided itself on vibrancy and nightlife was slowly retreating indoors, the streets emptied not because of a storm or riot, but because of fear. Liverpool's ordinary rhythm, the laughter of teenagers, the chatter of evening commuters, the hum of nightlife was replaced by quiet, tension, and uncertainty. Every knock on a door, every shadow on a street corner, and every unanswered phone call carried a new weight. And somewhere within the city, the force behind these disappearances watched silently, calculating and waiting. The sense of normalcy had been shattered, and no one knew how deep the danger ran. Fear began to spread through Liverpool like wildfire. Families who once allowed their teenagers the freedom to walk home from school or hang out with friends now insisted that they be accompanied at all times. Even familiar streets, once considered safe, now felt threatening. Parents would peer out of windows, watching every passerby, every car, and every movement on the pavements. Neighbors spoke in hushed tones, sharing theories and rumors, unsure who to trust. A city that had always thrived on community spirit now seemed fragmented, each household guarding its own door as if the streets themselves had turned hostile. Local schools and colleges were among the first to notice the visible signs of panic. Attendance dropped slightly as parents chose to keep their children home. Security measures were hastily increased. Gates were locked, security personnel were stationed at entrances, and students were warned not to walk alone, even for short distances. Teachers tried to reassure anxious students, but the fear in their voices was impossible to hide. Teenagers themselves began forming groups, refusing to separate even for the shortest journeys. Friendships were overshadowed by suspicion, and every shadow or strange noise triggered an instinctive worry that someone was following them. Public transport, once a bustling network carrying hundreds of young passengers, saw empty seats and quiet buses. Evening buses, normally filled with chatter and laughter, became eerily silent. Drivers reported passengers staring out the windows nervously, clutching bags tightly, and glancing repeatedly at strangers boarding the same vehicle. Even walking along familiar routes triggered a growing sense of unease. Streetlights became a source of comfort, their dim glow the only reassurance against the unseen threat that seemed to lurk everywhere. Social media amplified the city's collective fear. Posts about missing girls circulated endlessly, with neighbors and strangers alike offering tips, advice, and warnings. Some shared sightings that turned out to be false alarms, but each report, no matter how minor, fueled the growing paranoia. Local groups and forums became platforms for speculation, debates, and desperate pleas for information. Messages warning parents to keep children indoors appeared alongside videos claiming to show suspicious figures near schools or bus stops. The city, already tense, now felt like it was being watched from every angle. Police struggled to keep up with the volume of concern. Investigators moved from one lead to another, checking CCTV footage, visiting homes, and questioning families and friends. Every tip was followed, but each line of inquiry ended in uncertainty. The lack of witnesses frustrated authorities the most. Even the briefest glimpses of possible suspects were lost in shadows or blocked by distance. The sense of urgency increased, but answers remained out of reach. The psychological impact on the city was profound. Teenagers began avoiding the places they loved. Parks were deserted in the evenings, and community events saw record low attendance. Parents spoke of sleepless nights, constantly worrying about the safety of their children. The sense of fear became a constant companion, a weight pressing down on the daily lives of everyone. Liverpool, a city proud of its vibrant culture and energetic streets, had become a city on edge. The missing girls were no longer just victims. They were symbols of a larger, terrifying reality. Something or someone was preying on the city's most vulnerable, and nobody knew how to stop it. Even as the authorities worked tirelessly, the fear persisted, growing stronger with each passing day. It was no longer a matter of hope or speculation. The streets themselves seemed unsafe, and every person, no matter how familiar, could be a stranger hiding a dark intent. The city had begun to shrink in the minds of its residents. The once open streets and lively neighborhoods became a maze of suspicion and anxiety. Liverpool was learning a hard truth. Fear could spread faster than crime, and when it did, it changed the way a city lived, breathed, and moved. As the city's panic deepened, detectives began to search for a connection that might explain the sudden rise in disappearances. At first, nothing obvious linked the cases. The girls came from different neighborhoods, had different routines, and moved in separate social circles. Yet, when investigators reviewed timelines and locations, a disturbing pattern began to surface. Each missing girl had been last seen near areas known for gang activity, districts where local street gangs controlled alleyways, abandoned buildings, and backstreets. It was not common for these gangs to target individuals in this way, and yet the consistency could not be ignored. The authorities began mapping the disappearances, plotting the last known locations against ganged territories. At first, the overlap seemed coincidental. Liverpool was a large city, and gang-controlled zones intersected with many public routes. But as more data was added, the pattern became undeniable. Certain gangs were present near the last sightings of nearly every missing girl. What unsettled the detectives most was the timing. All disappearances occurred when gang members were known to be active, yet there were no reports of violent confrontations or resistance. It was as if the girls had vanished into thin air while the gangs watched from the shadows. Detectives launched surveillance operations, monitoring key streets and abandoned properties connected to gang activity. Officers documented movements, taking note of unusual behaviors, late-night gatherings, and hidden passageways. Local intelligence suggested that some gangs had developed intricate networks, using their influence to remain unnoticed while carrying out activities far more dangerous than simple drug deals or theft. The idea that these groups could operate undetected in plain sight added a new layer of terror to the investigation. Meanwhile, police began cross-referencing past crimes associated with the gangs. They discovered a series of unexplained assaults and thefts in the same neighborhoods that until now had seemed unrelated. These incidents, once dismissed as minor disturbances, suddenly fit into a larger picture of calculated territorial control. Each gang, while known for enforcing fear within their areas, appeared to have been quietly preparing a system that could be used to monitor, track, and manipulate potential victims. As this realization sank in, the investigation shifted from searching for isolated suspects to uncovering a network of hidden operations. Detectives started exploring abandoned warehouses, backstreets, and even forgotten underground passageways beneath the city, considering the possibility that the missing girls could have been lured or trapped in places few ever visited. The complexity of the plan, combined with the gang's ability to remain invisible, made the investigation both urgent and dangerous. The city's young residents, unaware of the growing storm beneath their feet, continued their routines, unaware that someone was watching every move, calculating the next step with chilling precision. The detectives knew they had found a clue to the disappearances, but they also understood the terrifying implication. This was not a series of random crimes. It was the work of an organized force, hidden in plain sight, that had been quietly establishing control over the city's most vulnerable. Liverpool's streets, once familiar and safe, had become a maze of danger, and the truth waiting to be uncovered was far darker than anyone could have imagined. The breakthrough came unexpectedly, in a place no one would have thought to look. A search team investigating the outskirts of Liverpool discovered a discarded backpack near an abandoned shipping tunnel on the edge of the docks. Inside were personal belongings of one of the missing girls' school books, a phone with a cracked screen, and a small wallet. Nothing about the items suggested a struggle had taken place, but their presence in such a remote location raised immediate alarm. The team noticed strange spray-painted symbols on the tunnel walls, symbols known to authorities as markers used by gangs to claim territory and communicate silently. It was a chilling reminder that someone had planned these disappearances with care, leaving faint breadcrumbs that only certain people could understand. The tunnel itself was dark and narrow, stretching farther beneath the city than anyone had expected. Its entrance, hidden behind piles of shipping crates and debris, showed signs of frequent use. Footprints in the dust suggested people moved quickly and deliberately, and scattered remnants of food wrappers indicated that someone had stayed there for extended periods. The discovery confirmed the investigators' worst suspicions. The disappearances were not random acts of violence, but part of an organized system. The gang behind it had identified areas to operate unnoticed, using the city's forgotten spaces as secret pathways and hideouts. Authorities quickly mobilized to investigate the network of underground tunnels. Maps of the docks and surrounding neighborhoods were cross-referenced with previous reports of suspicious activity. Locals began recalling fleeting observations: unmarked vans near the docks, shadows moving in places they thought were abandoned, the sound of muffled voices echoing through alleyways at night. These small details, once dismissed as coincidental, now painted a picture of a group that had been meticulously monitoring the city for months. The scale of the operation suggested planning, patience, and ruthless control. Inside the tunnels, police found more evidence of activity: torn pieces of clothing, remnants of personal items, and signs of makeshift sleeping areas. One corner contained smashed phones and electronics, clearly destroyed to erase traces of communication. It was as if the gang had anticipated discovery and attempted to remove any direct links. Despite these efforts, the sheer volume of discarded items suggested a careless confidence. Either the gang believed they would never be caught, or they were preparing for something larger. The investigators realized the tunnels were not just a hiding place. They were part of a larger, organized network used to control movement, track victims, and maintain secrecy. The psychological impact on the police was immediate. This was not a simple criminal act. It was a carefully orchestrated strategy. Someone had taken the city's vulnerability and turned it into a weapon. Every missing girl, every terrified parent, and every anxious teenager was connected to a system designed to operate in silence. The discovery of the backpack and the tunnel network confirmed that the gang had been watching, planning, and exploiting Liverpool's overlooked spaces long before the first girl disappeared. As word of the discovery spread, the city grew even more anxious. Residents who lived near the docks avoided the area entirely, fearing they might stumble upon the gang or, worse, another victim. Parents warned children not to stray from well-lit streets, and community patrols increased their presence. Liverpool had already been living in fear, but now that fear was grounded in evidence. The shadows beneath the city were real, and the people controlling them were calculating, patient, and dangerous. For the first time, both authorities and residents understood that the missing girls were only the visible part of a network operating beneath the city, invisible to most, yet capable of causing devastating harm at any moment. The discovery of the tunnels was only the beginning. Police, armed with flashlights and protective gear, ventured deeper into the underground network beneath Liverpool. The passages twisted and branched unpredictably, some leading to small chambers hidden beneath the city streets, others opening into larger spaces that resembled forgotten storage areas. Every step revealed more evidence that the gang had been living, planning, and operating in these tunnels for months, if not years. The smell of damp concrete and decay was overwhelming, a constant reminder that these spaces had been used to harbor secrets the city above had never suspected. In the larger rooms, investigators found makeshift bedding, empty food containers, and discarded clothing that appeared to belong to several different individuals. It was clear the tunnels were not simply a temporary hideout. They had been adapted into a fully functional, hidden environment. Evidence suggested people had slept, cooked, and even lived in these areas for extended periods. Investigators noted signs of meticulous planning. Pathways were cleared of debris, corners were marked with symbols or spray paint, and certain areas were reinforced with boards and metal sheets, likely to prevent intrusions. The gang had transformed the tunnels into a controlled environment where they could operate without interference. One particularly chilling discovery was a room filled with maps of Liverpool, marked with circles around bus stops, parks, shopping areas, and popular shortcuts taken by teenagers. Notes were scribbled in the margins, indicating careful observation and timing. Police believed these maps were used to track potential victims, plan abductions, and coordinate the movement of those already taken. Each mark told a story of calculated control and methodical preparation. The level of organization was terrifying. It suggested the gang had spent months, if not years, developing a system designed to manipulate the city above and remain undetected. Other items found hinted at a disturbing level of sophistication. Smashed phones and shredded documents suggested attempts to erase digital traces and prevent victims from contacting the outside world. There were coded notebooks, scraps of clothing that did not belong to the gang members, and containers that once held food and water for multiple people. These findings painted a grim picture. The gang was not only abducting girls, but keeping them hidden, likely for extended periods, all while maintaining strict control over their movements. The psychological impact on the investigators was immediate and profound. They were not dealing with a single offender or a few opportunistic criminals. They were facing an organized operation that had exploited the city's blind spots and hidden spaces. The tunnels were more than a hiding place. They were a fortress, a command center, and a carefully concealed network designed to maintain power and secrecy. Every discovery reinforced the terrifying possibility that the gang had perfected their system, understanding human behavior, city geography, and law enforcement limitations in equal measure. Word of the underground network soon reached the city, deepening the fear that had already gripped Liverpool. Residents began imagining that every alley, abandoned building, or darkened street could hide something sinister. Teenagers stayed close to friends, and parents doubled their vigilance. Authorities realized that while the tunnels had provided the first tangible evidence of the gang's operations, they might only be seeing the tip of the iceberg. The scale of the network suggested more hidden chambers, more victims, and more planning than anyone had imagined. The city had entered a new stage of fear, one grounded not in rumors or imagination, but in the terrifying reality of what lurked beneath their feet. Just as the police began to feel a small measure of control over the investigation, a shocking twist came from an unexpected direction. Information arrived from a rival gang member, delivered in secret and with extreme caution. It was a handwritten note, left at a location known only to authorities and carefully timed to be found without alerting anyone else. The note contained details that no outsider could have known. The locations where the missing girls might be held, the gang's internal hierarchy, and references to coded operations used to communicate within their organization. The revelation stunned investigators. For months, they had been trying to map the gang's movements. Yet this single act of betrayal exposed the scale of planning and control the gang had exercised over the city. The note revealed the ruthless logic behind the gang's actions. The kidnapped girls were not taken randomly. Each was chosen because of her routine, her connections, or simply because she had been alone at the wrong moment. The gang had been exploiting predictable patterns in daily life, turning ordinary streets, parks, and bus stops into a calculated hunting ground. The information suggested that some gang leaders had been obsessed with control, using fear and intimidation not only to manipulate their members, but also to dominate the wider community. It was a chilling reminder that the city's sense of safety had been an illusion. Police realized that the note also contained intelligence about the gang's future plans. The rival member had hinted at further abductions, planned routes, and potential hideouts. It became clear that the gang had been preparing to expand their operations beyond what had already been discovered. They had studied law enforcement patterns, city surveillance coverage, and even social behaviors to ensure that their actions remained invisible. The audacity of it was terrifying. Someone had orchestrated these crimes with meticulous care, confident that no one would uncover the truth until it was too late. The betrayal within the criminal world exposed not only the gang's network, but also the internal tensions that had allowed outsiders to gain insight. It became evident that power struggles had been ongoing, and that some members were willing to risk everything to undermine the leadership. The note suggested that rivalries were not just personal, but strategic, a way to destabilize the gang while benefiting from information they could sell to law enforcement. This insight changed the investigation entirely. Authorities were no longer just reacting to the gang's movements, they now had a roadmap to anticipate them. At the same time, the revelation intensified the danger. The gang, sensing that some secrets had been exposed, likely tightened security and became more unpredictable. Any misstep could provoke violent retaliation or lead to the disappearance of additional victims. The stakes had grown higher than ever. The city of Liverpool, already living under a cloud of fear, now faced the knowledge that the gang was not only powerful, but also calculating, capable of responding swiftly to threats, and willing to exploit the city's blind spots to maintain control. For the investigators, the note was both a breakthrough and a warning. It offered the guidance they needed to locate potential victims and dismantle the gang's operation. But it also revealed the ruthless intelligence behind it all. The betrayal highlighted a grim truth. Criminal organizations could thrive on secrecy, deception, and the very vulnerabilities of the city itself. Liverpool's shadowy underworld had been exposed, but the darkness it represented was far from extinguished. The hunt for the missing girls had entered a dangerous new phase, one where every discovery could bring salvation or spark a new wave of terror. Armed with the intelligence from the betrayal, the police planned a decisive raid. The location identified in the note was an abandoned warehouse near the docks, a structure long forgotten by the city above. At night, under the cover of darkness, officers moved quietly toward the building, aware that any sudden noise could alert the gang. The air was thick with tension, each step echoing against the metal walls of the surrounding area. Investigators knew that inside, the missing girls could be waiting, terrified, and vulnerable, while the gang members were likely armed and prepared to defend their territory. When the raid began, officers encountered an immediate sense of chaos. The warehouse, though abandoned on the surface, had been fortified from within. Makeshift locks, soundproof boards, and partitions divided the interior into a maze of rooms. Some areas were cluttered with crates, old furniture, and discarded materials, used to obscure movement and delay intruders. The police proceeded cautiously, sweeping each room with flashlights and tactical precision. Every sound, the scrape of a foot, the faint shuffle of movement set nerves on edge. It became clear that the gang had been preparing for the possibility of intrusion, but they had not anticipated the scale and coordination of the raid. In one of the inner rooms, officers made a horrifying but relieving discovery. Several of the missing girls were huddled together, frightened but alive. Their expressions reflected weeks of fear and confusion, but the sight of rescuers brought relief and tears. Investigators quickly assessed the girls' condition, providing immediate medical attention and comfort. It was evident that the gang had maintained strict control over their captives, isolating them from the outside world and limiting contact to ensure obedience and silence. As the search continued, police found further evidence of the gang's organization. Bags of cash, forged identification documents, and coded notebooks detailed planned abductions and potential targets for the coming months. Each piece of evidence revealed the meticulous planning and audacity behind the crimes. Investigators realized that while some gang members had fled before the raid, the ones who remained had left a clear trail of the operation's inner workings. The discovery offered not only hope for the current victims, but also a roadmap to prevent future crimes. The raid extended beyond the warehouse itself. Officers pursued fleeing gang members through the docklands, navigating narrow alleys, abandoned piers, and unlit streets. Some suspects were captured after tense chases, while others vanished into the night, leaving investigators aware that the network extended further than they had imagined. The operation demonstrated both the resourcefulness of law enforcement and the adaptability of the criminals they were confronting. In the aftermath, the city of Liverpool felt a mixture of relief and lingering fear. The rescued girls returned to their families, but the knowledge that the gang had operated undetected for so long left a permanent mark on the community. Parents remained vigilant, teens stayed close to friends, and neighborhoods organized increased patrols. The raid had succeeded in saving lives and exposing the gang's network, but it also revealed the hidden dangers that could exist beneath the surface of an ordinary city. For authorities, the operation was a pivotal moment in the investigation. It had proven that careful planning, intelligence gathering, and swift action could disrupt even the most ruthless criminal organizations. Yet, the realization remained that the city's safety could never again be taken for granted. Liverpool had been reminded that fear could grow quietly, invisibly, and with devastating consequences, and that vigilance was the only barrier against the shadows that lingered just out of sight. The aftermath of the raid left Liverpool in a state of cautious relief. The rescued girls returned to their families, and the immediate threat of the gang's operations had been disrupted. Hospitals and support centers were filled with loved ones offering care, counselors assisting the girls to process their trauma, and police ensuring that the families felt protected. Despite the sense of relief, the city could not shake the memory of the weeks of fear that had gripped every neighborhood. Parents continued to watch over their children with heightened vigilance, and teenagers hesitated to return to routines that had once felt safe. The shadows of those weeks remained, a silent reminder of the danger that had been so close. Though some gang members had been captured, others had vanished into the city's criminal underground. Law enforcement knew that the threat was not entirely eliminated. Some feared that the leaders had fled, regrouping and planning elsewhere, their network merely fragmented but not destroyed. Investigators continued to scour abandoned buildings, review digital evidence, and monitor known gang territories, aware that the operations had been far more extensive than initially suspected. The tunnels beneath the city had been explored, yet some chambers remained hidden, suggesting that the gang had contingency plans even authorities had not yet uncovered. Communities began the long process of healing. Neighborhood groups organized events to reclaim public spaces and rebuild trust among residents. Schools held workshops on safety, self-awareness, and the importance of reporting suspicious behavior. The city, shaken but resilient, sought to transform fear into vigilance, teaching young people that awareness and caution could provide protection against those who preyed on vulnerability. Yet even with these efforts, the memory of the disappearances lingered. Parents avoided shortcuts through quiet streets, and teenagers moved in groups, instinctively calculating risks in ways they had never done before. The case sparked broader reflection on the vulnerabilities hidden within a bustling city. Liverpool, with its lively streets, docks, and historic neighborhoods, had proved to be fertile ground for a criminal network to operate unseen. Authorities examined policing strategies, surveillance coverage, and community outreach programs, seeking ways to prevent such organized crime from taking root again. The investigation had uncovered not just the immediate danger, but also the sophistication of a criminal system that had exploited fear, anonymity, and the city's blind spots. For the girls who were rescued, life would never be the same. Therapy, careful supervision, and emotional support became daily routines, while the city struggled to reconcile relief with the scars left by trauma. Families learned to balance gratitude with fear, appreciating that their loved ones were alive, while remaining acutely aware that similar threats could exist in other forms. The public, too, became more cautious, understanding that vigilance was not paranoia, but a necessary response to a city that had been infiltrated by darkness. Even as Liverpool attempted to move forward, questions lingered. How extensive had the gang's network truly been? Were there other victims who had not yet been discovered? And had authorities uncovered the full scope of the operation beneath the city streets? The raid had saved lives and exposed the gang, but the underground world of crime, secrecy, and control remained a presence in the collective memory of the city. Liverpool had survived the terror, but it had also learned that fear could grow silently, invisibly, and with devastating consequences. The story of the missing girls became a lasting reminder. Vigilance, courage, and community resilience were the only barriers against the darkness that could exist just beneath the surface.